Another edition of Moments with MindLeaps. My name is Jesse Hawks, and I am the USA Program Director for MindLeaps. And today we are extremely excited to have with us Kim Flores of Hello Insight. Kim is the co-founder and Chief Executive Officer of Hello Insight, which she's dedicated her career to making youth development programs and the evaluation of those programs actionable for everyone. And I'm going to get her right here into this room. Kim will be joining us very briefly. Hi, Kim.
Hi, Jesse. How are you doing?
Doing well, thank you. How's the weather down there in Florida?
Nice and warm. I'm sure nobody wants to hear that lives on the Northeast.
Actually, it's not so bad today. I think it's in the 50s and a little sun. It's amazing. You do so much work. You work in New York. You work with a lot of organizations in New York. You have a lot of history back here in New York as well. So it's amazing that you're able to continue to do that work from Florida. Do you guys do are you working remotely, or do you have an office there in Florida?
I don't have an office here in Florida, and up until 2 years ago, I was flying back and forth every other week. So I'm just getting adjusted to the fact that I actually have to say that I live in Florida, because up until now, I always kind of lived here, but I was back and forth more than not. So we don't have a physical office because we have employees all over the United States and then also throughout Colombia.
Fabulous. Yes, and we're going to get to some of that work that you're doing internationally, as MindLeaps is an international organization as well, and proud also to be working in the United States. So I'm just going to tell everybody a little bit more about what you've done in your career. Kim has dedicated her career to making youth development programs and the evaluation of those programs actionable for everyone. She draws upon her training in developmental and environmental psychology and has spent the last 3 decades developing innovative strategies to make evaluation useful and accessible for all. She's also done a lot of international research and evaluation projects that have focused on youth development, civic engagement, youth media, the arts, children's rights, post-conflict, protection, international development, and a variety of social issues. And she's also authored several books and publications on youth-led evaluation and organizational learning. Kim, we are so happy to have you with us today. I thought I would start us off by asking you a little bit about how did you actually become interested in youth development? And how did you come to co-found Hello Insight?
Oh my goodness, that's a very long story. I became interested in youth development. I don't know, depending on what country you live in, I could say that I was a youth at the time, but I think that my biggest area of interest was theater, and so I moved to New York fairly young, in my late teens, early 20s, to engage in theater, and I was particularly miserable at school, and I kind of barely made it out, I feel, and I wasn't a very good learner or good student. But when I got into theater and I was in New York, I started to flourish, and I started to learn, and I started to grow and be a voracious reader, read, Shakespeare, I memorized things, and somewhere in that process I learned that I could learn, which was news to me. And I was developing. I was developing as a young person, and I started running street theater programs in Central Harlem, and got very interested in what was developmental about theater. And I wound up going back to school, and my question was, how come I was learning and growing in theater and I wasn't in school?
Interesting. And what was the answer?
Well, it's become a 30-year-long journey, I think, of asking and answering that question. But I got very interested in the concept of participation and collaboration, and some of the ways that the arts really affords young people the opportunity to collaborate and to create. And I think some of the elements that I learned that were developmental for me is that, first and foremost, adults in the theater always related to me as who I was becoming, not just who I was in the moment, which was probably a fairly poor actress, honestly, but they related to me as somebody who was capable of becoming an actress and somebody who could stretch and grow and take on new roles and new responsibilities. And there's always this relation to me, probably in advance of who I actually really was, and a demand actually from the whole theater company that I grow and evolve constantly, right? And so I think that stretching and opportunity to take big risks and to fail forward was really present for me in the theater. You always say there's no mistakes in art, right? And so there's just this great opportunity to try things out and to take risks. And I think there was also just this, desire to keep stepping into new roles and stepping into new responsibilities. So I got to perform well beyond where I actually was at any given moment. And I think that what I learned as a developmental psychologist is when we're working with little children, we do that all the time. With babies, for example, who are kind of, not really speaking to us, but saying things like ba, 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 ba. And then we relate to them as speakers and we say, oh, did you want your bottle? And then the baby learns to speak in this relationship between an adult who's more advanced than them, who's relating to them as a speaker and as a thinker and as somebody who's formulating thoughts, and the baby performing in advance of themselves becomes a speaker. And then what I've learned is that in school, so often that relationship shifts, and we begin to relate to young people as who they are and what they're capable of only in that moment, and we aren't stretching them as much. And so while we might learn some things and might our cognitive brains might grow, we're not developing fully as human beings who are growing in all kinds of ways, not just cognitively.
Yeah, I mean, I was involved in theater as a young person as well, and I can contrast that experience with, also being like heavily in academics and trying to stuff as much as I could into my brain in terms of academics. But what do I really remember and what do I really appreciate myself? It's more about the things where I could take risks and I could really be myself. So yeah, I totally identify with your story on that point as well.
Yeah. And I think also nobody had related to me as a learner per se. It's kind of had this dumb blonde, I'm from the South, and, the expectation wasn't that I stretch and grow in those ways. So when the expectation shifted, I shifted with it.
That's wonderful that you had that opportunity. So can you tell me, I know Hello Insight has somewhat of a focus on social emotional learning, and that is something that is dear to the hearts of MindLeaps, as you know, heart of MindLeaps, because of our dance program focusing on improving social emotional learning skills. Can you tell us a little bit more about social emotional learning and what Hello Insight was founded and what it does?
Yeah, for sure. So I think one of the challenges that I found out kind of early on is that while in developmental psychology was understanding like whole child development as something that was critically important, and that it was not just cognitive growth and development, but about our social and emotional well-being that was super critical. I realized that was not a conversation necessarily in the field, and so I was working a lot with arts programs and sports programs in the early 90s who were being asked to measure their impact based off of school grades. So there was a big shift in the United States where we started the No Child Left Behind Act, and there was a desire to help have nonprofit kind of out-of-school time or informal education programs fill some of the gaps that we were seeing in school. And at that time, a lot of nonprofits were saying, gosh, Kim, we have to show how ice hockey in Harlem is shifting school grades. We have to show how, our dance program is enhancing the school performance. And I kept saying, this is a very odd thing to be asking, because it seems unfair to ask informal education programs to change the narrative about the local school down the street, right? Not that they're not contributing to young people's learning and development, but perhaps we're not looking at the right thing. We're not looking at the right metric for our programs, right? And so I think I got very interested in social emotional learning, and at the time, it was coming out of regular developmental psychology, but there was a lot of funding that started to be poured into social emotional learning. And what we were seeing is that when young people were developing socially and emotionally, they were having better school grades. They were having better career pathways. They were having stronger long-term outcomes. So as the research started to grow, I would say probably 10 years ago, we started to see that actually social emotional learning was predicting those long-term outcomes, and those kinds of whole child development outcomes were much closer to the hearts and minds of what arts programs and sports programs were trying to accomplish to begin with. And so for me, it was like a big yay, I'm so glad that we're showing that those outcomes predict those long-term things. Let's stop having arts programs say how they're fixing the school down the block, and have them talk about how they're actually promoting the entire development of the child in an effort for them to have long-term thriving gains and good success in school. But what was exciting to me about social emotional learning is that it really spoke, I think, to the hearts and minds of arts organizations and sports programs that always had at their center the development of the whole child and wanted to focus on the whole child, but were being asked only to measure their success in terms of school grades and outcomes.
And so Hello Insight, you work with a variety of organizations now, and can you give us an example of how you assist those organizations with your organization's tools?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing was just learning that those outcomes were important, right? And the next one was trying to help organizations measure their success and learn about social emotional learning. And so what we realized is that there was a fairly big gap in nonprofits' ability to measure those outcomes. So the question was, could we create an online learning platform where we could bring lots of nonprofits together who had similar challenges and develop some tools and resources that could be used across organizations? So we currently work with about 2,000 nonprofits in the United States, and then we also work in Latin America and the Caribbean through partnership with the YMCA of Latin America and the Caribbean and the Templeton Foundation. And the idea here was to try to bring folks together around common measures of social emotional learning that we all thought were critical, whether it was in the arts or sports or career readiness or college readiness or youth organizing. What are some common things that we all agree on would be great outcomes for young people? And what are the key experiences that we think are driving those outcomes? And then creating tools and resources so that we could quickly and easily assess young people's SEL and also target and figure out what are the kinds of things that would work for those young people that we're serving, so that we could deliver some insights to frontline staff. And so I think we're really trying to create a kind of online evaluation platform that was accessible to everybody and wasn't going to require having a Ph.D. on staff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fantastic. Well, I was wondering if I could bring it to the current day. You've been interacting with a lot of youth organizations, especially post-COVID-19 or during the COVID pandemic. What would you say are some of the key social emotional challenges that are facing young people in the United States or in particular regions today? Is it the same everywhere, or has it been varying from place to place?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's a lot of similarities internationally in terms of the health and well-being needs that are growing. In this country, the U.S. Surgeon General has said that we're in the midst of a mental health crisis. That was even before the pandemic, and then add the pandemic onto it, that we've had a massive mental health crisis. And we've been seeing the same thing internationally, especially with young people. Young people are more depressed, feeling more isolated, feeling more uncertain of the future. Young people, certainly in this country, who've been experiencing the kind of the fallout of the murder of George Floyd and the racial uprising that's been happening in this in this country have been talking deeply about mental health. We've been doing a series of conversations within the youth sector, and we started those conversations with young people, and we asked them to speak to us about race and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they decided to center the conversation on mental health.
Well, you were talking a little bit about how you're talking to young people in the United States about what do they want to focus on with relation to diversity, equity, and inclusion, coming out of the greater understanding of the importance of talking about DEI. And I think you were saying that the young people are saying, look, there's a real mental health component to this. It's not just about, well, I'll let you talk about what that component is.
I think that that's exactly right. They really, really wanted to lean in the mental health component, and they really felt like this is a very stressful time for them. They're growing up in a very different kind of world than we were, and their futures are a little more uncertain than ours, and they're also grappling with a lot of very big issues right now. And so I think that they really feel that, and they really a lot of young people who are in arts programs and other kinds of programs are really excited, because I think a lot of arts programs help young people actually have those discussions that are often hard discussions. One young person in particular was talking about the use of music as a way to open up conversations about how we feel in this moment and talk about our feelings. So I think young people are thinking about this an awful lot right now in ways that we didn't, I don't think, when I was young. And I do think that the arts have a particular way of helping us sort through our emotions. I certainly know that as a young person myself, that it was the first time I ever thought about what I was thinking when I was in the theater and how I was feeling, right? That it was the first time I'd ever begun to even consider bringing my emotions to the table. And I think that one thing that happens in the arts that doesn't happen in our everyday life is that our whole selves we're asked to bring our whole selves to the table in order to create, right? We're asked to bring our emotions, to bring our thoughts, our feelings, our experiences. I always say the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? We're allowed to bring all of it in and create with it. And that's a very different kind of relationship to our feelings and our thoughts than we have in other kinds of settings where we're actually asked to leave them at the door.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm going to have to update your bio in the Instagram to include some of your theater background. You have to send me some of the productions you were in. It is interesting. I mean, as I'm also a theater actor who has done a lot of nonprofit work or, segued into education, and you sort of, while you take that world with you, you don't necessarily always tout it or talk about it because it doesn't necessarily always fit into the bio. Or it makes it too long. Well, okay, so here's a question I've been meaning to ask you, which is there a story that you remember from your time with Hello Insight or any time in your career that you just will never forget for one reason or another, a positive story? We're talking a lot about deep issues here, maybe a good story.
Oh gosh, now you made me change it because I was.
No, you can do the meaningful one that you had.
Well, it's funny because I wasn't thinking. I have a lot of great stories working with young people because they always surprise you. But something I did think of when you asked me that before was I was so struck. I was working with a group of youth organizers, and this young woman said to me, my teacher asked me to check my culture at the door. And I thought, that's so crazy. I just had this mind-numbing experience. How could you ask a young person to check their culture at the door? It's such a very odd thing to ask. I was somewhat mortified about it. And again, I think just back to the position of in theater, it's the opposite. We're asking you to bring all of that stuff into the door because that's what the group is going to create with. And so I just thought of that. But so many great experiences.
were you talking to the young person in that instance? Were you meeting with them, or were you? Did it come up in a phone conversation, or?
Well, a lot of times what I'm asking young people, right, in this youth organizing group was we were talking about how organizing might be different than school, how youth organizing might be different. And so she was saying to me that it was very different in organizing because, quite like theater, right, like when young people are organizing around issues that are impacting their lives, they're asked to talk about issues that are impacting their lives. So they're asked to really bring their narratives to the table and to think about how those narratives are shared with each other. So they're not just, personally theirs, but they're more a collective understanding of our narratives. And then they're using those narratives to craft campaigns or things that they want to see change in the world, right? So, So she was able to say the difference between the youth workers in the program and her teacher. And for her, when her teacher asked her to check her culture at the door, she realized, like, this is a very different setting than it is in my youth program. My classroom is a very different kind of setting than my youth program.
Yes. And so you've had such an amazing impact on the field of youth development and evaluation, and how that evaluation can be used for programmatic changes and advances. Now, if somebody was out there, young people out there who are interested in getting into this field, you have a Ph.D. They may be feeling a little intimidated in some way, but what do you think? What's your advice to somebody who says, I'm really interested in this idea of social emotional learning or youth development work, but particularly with that lens of social emotional learning? How would they get started in exploring that field?
That's a really good question. Up until recently, there weren't a lot of, doctoral programs or even undergraduate programs that focused on youth work. I know the City University of New York just opened up a bachelor's degree for youth work, so I'm so excited about that. That's a yippee.
Wow. And youth work, you said?
Yeah, for youth workers. It's really awesome. And they have an MA and a BA just opened up. So it's so exciting that youth workers can start to get credentialed and some credit for the awesome work that they're doing.
Fabulous.
It is fabulous. It is. And I think before that, it was most of us came through out of psychology. But I think the interesting thing I would say is, if you can go get a doctorate, go get a doctorate. I remember thinking my mentor, when I finally went back to school, I was older because I'd been in theater for a while, and I went back to school. And my mentor said you should, first of all, she asked me what I wanted to study, which nobody had asked me what I wanted to study before, and I wasn't quite sure. I knew that it was in a specific area. But then she kept pushing me to figure out what I was interested in myself, and I didn't know. So I would say social work, and then she would go, well, let's go, you can go work. I worked at a homeless shelter for a while. I thought, no, that's not for me. It was really hard work. I wasn't good at it. I thought teacher. I got a job teaching, and then every time I'd come back to her and say, that's not quite it, and I would feel like such a failure, and she would say, no, that's just one more thing we know you don't want to do, and we'll find the right avenue for you. So it was important, but I did know that the question that I had to do with why I could develop in one setting and not another, but I just didn't know how I wanted to explore it. But I think there's more avenues now around it, and there's more programs to do that. But when she said you should go get your Ph.D., I ran home to my then husband. I was previously married to Sabo, not Flores, and I told my husband at that time, I said, I'm gonna get a she told my mentor told me to get a Ph.D. and I don't know what it is, but she said it's gonna take 6 years, and he said, no, you're not doing that. We don't have 6 years, for you to go to school. And I told her that, and she said, well, 6 years is going to go by anyway, so you might as well have a PhD at the end of it.
Very good advice.
It was a very good insight. I always tell people that when they say it's going to take too long. I say, the time's going to go by anyway. You might as well.
That is words of wisdom there. I agree. So, Kim, congratulations to you on all that you have accomplished, and it has been such a pleasure to get to know you and to work in the same field as you here in New York City. And I look forward to our continued conversations and collaborations. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing all of your insights today as the co-founder of Hello Insight.